Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we extract the core insights and surprising stories from the deepest corners of history.
Hello.
Today, we are immersing ourselves completely in the life of a woman whose reign of 63 years didn't just passively span decades. It actively defined an entire global era
The Victorian era.
and set the stage for the modern monarchy, Queen Victoria.
That's such an accurate framing. I mean, when we talk about the Victorian era, we are talking about a time marked by, well, dizzying industrial innovation,
Right.
seismic political and constitutional change in the UK, massive scientific leaps, and of course the unparalleled expansion of the British Empire.
And Victoria was the symbolic figurehead, the literal embodiment of this relentless forward motion.
She really was.
And what an astonishing set of titles she accrued. She reigned as Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland,
But then later, she took on that monumental additional title.
Empress of India.
Exactly. She
Wow.
presided over an empire so vast that, famously, the sun truly never set on it.
She was, at the same time, a local sovereign and a global superpower.
But you have to remember, her influence wasn't just geopolitical, it was intensely familial.
Ah, the grandmother of Europe.
That's the one. She earned that nickname for a reason. Her 9 children successfully married into royal and noble families across the entire continent.
Spreading the British royal bloodlines
Yeah.
and, crucially, the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha.
Into Spain, Russia, Prussia, you name it. This made her not just Queen of Britain, but practically the central hub for all of European royalty.
The sources we've pulled for this deep dive are just incredibly rich. We're drawing from comprehensive biographies, historical accounts of her court.
And her own
And-
journals, which are voluminous and intimate.
Yes. So our mission today is to move past that dour, stereotypical image we all have in our heads, the perpetually grieving widow in black, and instead understand the critical, surprising personal details and political shifts that enabled this privately emotional, sometimes highly secluded and fiercely determined woman to morph into the public, moral matriarch of a sprawling global empire.
And to understand that metamorphosis, you have to start at the very beginning, because her birth itself was steeped in political panic and dynastic crisis.
So let's unpack the circumstances leading to her arrival. Victoria was born Alexandrina Victoria at Kensington Palace on May 24, 1819. But her parents were essentially rushed into marriage to produce her, right?
Absolutely. The British monarchy under George III and his sons was facing a catastrophic lack of legitimate heirs.
A real crisis.
It came to a head with the death of Princess Charlotte of Wales in 1817. She was the only legitimate grandchild of George III at that point.
And her death left the succession just hanging by a thread.
It did, and this forced the remaining elder sons of George III, who had, previously enjoyed rather profligate lifestyles.
Including Victoria's father, Prince Edward, the Duke of Kent.
Exactly. It forced them to hastily marry and produce legitimate children.
So Victoria's very existence was a political necessity. It was driven by this desperation to secure the dynasty.
Precisely. Her father was George III's 4th son, and her mother, Princess Victoria of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, was already a widow with 2 children from a prior marriage.
And when she was christened, she was named Alexandrina, after Tsar Alexander I of Russia, and Victoria after her mother.
Yes.
At birth, she was 5th in line, which might sound secure, but the remaining lives ahead of her were, well, they were frail.
The lineage ahead of her just collapsed almost immediately. Her father, the Duke of Kent, died suddenly in January 1820, less than a year after her birth.
Wow.
And just a week later, her grandfather, King George III, died. The pace of succession was breathtaking.
That rapid ascent meant she was quickly 3rd in line, behind 2 uncles, Frederick, Duke of York, and William, Duke of Clarence.
And crucially, neither of those men had surviving legitimate children.
I see.
So when Frederick died in 1827, and then George IV died in 1830, William became King William IV.
Making Victoria, at age 11, the official heir presumptive.
The stakes were literally life and death for the future of the House of Hanover.
That immense pressure, combined with her mother's immediate widowhood, led to what Victoria later described as a rather melancholy childhood.
Yes. She was raised in astonishing isolation at Kensington Palace under a regime that sounds like something out of a prison diary. The Kensington System.
It was an incredible structure of control, wasn't it?
It really was. The system was devised by her mother, the Duchess of Kent, and her fiercely ambitious comptroller, Sir John Conroy.
Their stated goal was protection, but the actual operation, It seems designed to ensure Victoria was psychologically weak.
And completely dependent on them both, preventing her from establishing any independent alliances.
And this wasn't just isolation from court or public life. It was this deeply invasive physical control.
Right.
She shared a bedroom with her mother every single night until the moment she became queen.
The psychological impact of that suffocating proximity must have been immense. It speaks to the utter lack of personal space and the continuous surveillance.
They essentially tried to weaponize isolation.
They did. They cut her off from anyone they deemed undesirable, which included most of the royal family. They restricted her social circle to ensure only Conroy and her mother had influence.
And this dynamic is so key to understanding her later reign, isn't it?
Yeah.
She learned early how to resist overwhelming control.
Yes.
Did that isolation affect her education?
Not in terms of rigor, no. She had private tutors, was highly intellectual, and learned French, German, Italian, and Latin.
But interestingly, despite her mother being German and her tutors covering multiple languages, she only spoke English at home.
That's right. And she did show early promise. She wrote and illustrated a children's story, The Adventures of Alice Lascelles, when she was just 10.
So she wasn't repressed in creativity, just in personal autonomy.
Exactly.
So we have this sharp, intensely monitored young woman who sees herself clearly as a pawn, which leads directly to the pivotal conflict over the regency.
Right. King William IV, her uncle, profoundly mistrusted Victoria's mother, and even more so, Conroy.
And a Regency Act from 1830 had designated her mother as the potential regent if William died before Victoria turned 18.
And the thought of Conroy and the Duchess running the country horrified him.
He didn't keep that horror quiet either, did he?
No, he was spectacularly public about it. He declared quite forcefully that he wished to live until Victoria's 18th birthday specifically to avoid that regency.
He essentially gave her a deadline to reach adulthood and assume full sovereignty.
The gauntlet was thrown down, and Victoria, despite her youth, started to exhibit that famous resistance.
She did. Her resistance to Conroy was fierce, and it really came to a head in 1835 when she contracted a severe fever.
And Conroy and her mother saw vulnerability as an opportunity.
They relentlessly badgered her while she was ill, pressuring her to make a formal, written promise to appoint Conroy as her private secretary immediately upon accession.
And she refused.
She fought them off, even in a state of physical weakness.
That moment of refusal, when she was physically vulnerable but intellectually resolute, must have cemented her will. It defined her character.
And the pivotal moment arrives on May 24, 1837, when Victoria turns 18.
Successfully eliminating the need for a regency.
Less than a month later, on June 20, William IV died. She was queen.
And the sources are unanimous. Her first act of true independence was banning Sir John Conroy from her immediate presence.
That iron will, forged in isolation, immediately manifested in her rule.
It's a profound irony, isn't it? The mother and Conroy tried to make her weak and dependent.
But the isolation they imposed actually insulated her political decision-making capacity.
And forced her to develop a fierce self-reliance that served her reign immediately. That is the essential takeaway from her childhood. The Kensington System was the crucible that burned away weakness and left behind a core of absolute, non-negotiable authority.
Let's move to the moment of accession. It's a beautifully stark image. She is woken at 6 a.m., alone in her dressing gown, told the king is dead, and realizing, consequently, that I am queen.
That solitude, after years of forced cohabitation, it's such a powerful symbol of her newfound independence. It marks the end of her childhood.
And it marked an immediate geographical shift for the monarchy, too.
Yes, since 1714, Britain had shared a monarch with the German Kingdom of Hanover.
Right.
However, Hanover operated under what is known as Salic law, a Germanic legal tradition that explicitly prohibited women from inheriting the throne.
So Salic law meant the union was severed.
Exactly. Victoria couldn't inherit Hanover. Her deeply unpopular uncle, Ernest Augustus, Duke of Cumberland, became King of Hanover, leaving Victoria to focus solely on the British and Irish crowns.
And she was 18. And politically green. So who steps in to guide this fiercely independent but inexperienced young sovereign?
The Whig Prime Minister, Lord Melbourne.
Yeah.
He became the dominant figure for her first few years, functioning not just as a political advisor, but really filling the emotional void left by her father's early death and the psychological conflict with Conroy.
He became a crucial father figure.
He did. The sources suggest their bond was profound, One commentator likened his affection for her to that of a father for a daughter he'd never had.
And that close relationship was essential, but it also fueled her political dependency, which led to immediate trouble.
Yes, and Melbourne, though, was destined to be swiftly overshadowed by the ultimate love match, Prince Albert.
Initially, Victoria was resistant to marriage. She referred to it as a shocking sickle alternative when Melbourne first suggested it.
Her uncle Leopold, King of the Belgians, was persistent, though. He'd already married one of her cousins to Queen Victoria and saw Albert, his nephew and her first cousin, as the ideal match.
And when Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha finally visited, Victoria was just instantly captivated.
Oh, she certainly didn't hold back in her diary. She described him as extremely handsome, his eyes are large and blue, and he has a beautiful nose and a very sweet mouth with fine teeth.
She was absolutely smitten.
Completely. And due to her status as reigning monarch, convention dictated that she had to propose to him.
Which she did in October 1839, just 5 days after his arrival.
That intensity really defined their entire relationship.
And their wedding night entry is perhaps one of the most famous and certainly the most ecstatic diary entries of any British monarch.
It truly captures the passion. She wrote that she never spent such an evening. My dearest, dearest dear Albert, his excessive love and affection gave me feelings of heavenly love and happiness I never could have hoped to have felt before. He clasped me in his arms and we kissed each other again and again.
It's clear that Albert quickly replaced Melbourne as her dominant political advisor and emotional confidant.
Very quickly.
And this shift in allegiance didn't go unnoticed and immediately led to a constitutional clash. The infamous bedchamber crisis of 1839.
This was a genuine constitutional pressure test for the young queen. After Melbourne's government was defeated on a bill concerning Jamaica's constitution, he resigned.
Right.
Robert Peel, the incoming Tory prime minister, insisted on replacing several of Victoria's ladies of the bedchamber, who were, by convention, the wives of Whig politicians.
And Victoria saw her ladies as personal friends, not political appointments, which is a legacy of her isolated childhood where true friendship was rare.
Exactly. She refused Peel's demand. But this wasn't just a personal spat, it was a political mistake.
How so?
Peel insisted he could not govern unless he had the full confidence and cooperation of the Queen's household. When she refused, he resigned, allowing Melbourne to return temporarily.
Wasn't this a massive constitutional misstep? She was essentially preventing the formation of a government based on her personal preference for household staff.
It was a clear demonstration of her inexperience and her loyalty to Melbourne over the political necessity of deference to Parliament. The ultimate insight here, though, is that this personal failure taught her a critical lesson.
That the crown must remain politically neutral in government formation.
She never repeated that mistake. It marks the beginning of her journey toward true constitutional discretion.
Unfortunately, that political learning curve came alongside a terrible personal scandal. The Lady Flora Hastings affair in 1839.
The scandal was fueled by the old animosities of the Kensington System. Because Victoria fiercely resented Sir John Conroy and that odious Lady Flora, who was aligned with him and her mother, she readily believed rumors that Lady Flora's abdominal swelling was an out-of-wedlock pregnancy.
Possibly by Conroy himself.
That was the rumor. It was pure personal vendetta. Lady Flora was pressured into an intimate examination where she was found to be a virgin.
And when she died shortly after from a liver tumor, the press and the Tory opposition used the tragedy to portray the Queen as heartless and irresponsible.
It was terrible for her image. The public outcry was severe enough that she was hissed and jeered in public as Mrs. Melbourne. Her immense initial popularity was severely damaged.
The volatile public mood of the 1840s also manifested in a series of alarming attacks on her person.
Yes, and rather than listing every single one rapidly, let's focus on the pattern this violence established.
Okay, so the first one, by Edward Oxford in 1840, actually had the reverse political effect, didn't it?
It did. It increased her popularity by generating public sympathy. The threat galvanized public support.
But the subsequent attempts really cemented her personal image as fearless.
Right. Think about John Francis in 1842. He aimed a pistol at her carriage, but it misfired.
And what did the Queen do the next day? This is an incredible story.
It's really interesting. Victoria, determined to bait the assailant into trying again so he could be caught red-handed, drove the exact same route the very next day.
At the same time.
But much faster and with a larger escort. She was deliberately challenging the threat.
That is extraordinary bravery. She essentially used herself as bait.
And it worked. He fired again, but was immediately seized.
And there were more attempts after that.
Yes, later that year, John William Bean tried to shoot her, though his pistol was only loaded with paper and tobacco. Later, William Hamilton in 1849 fired a powder-filled pistol, and then Robert Pate in 1850.
He had actually struck her.
He did, with a cane, crushing her bonnet and bruising her forehead.
And Pate and Hamilton were sentenced to 7 years transportation. For our listeners who might not be familiar with that older legal term, what does transportation mean in this context?
It means exile to a penal colony, usually in Australia. They weren't just jailed in England, they were shipped overseas to serve their sentence.
The severity of the punishment reflects the seriousness with which the Crown viewed these attacks, even if the weapons were ineffective.
The key takeaway, though, is that the Queen refused to allow these repeated threats to stop her from appearing in public, which ultimately solidified her reputation for constitutional resilience.
Moving to her personal life, despite the intense romance with Albert, the sources are quite clear that she loathed pregnancy.
She did. 9 children in 17 years, and she called babies ugly.
She was very blunt in her journals. She hated the physical demands of pregnancy, the vulnerability of it,
and viewed breastfeeding with disgust, preferring wet nurses. Yet this personal discomfort led to a groundbreaking moment in medical history.
the use of chloroform.
Precisely. During the birth of her 8th child, Prince Leopold, in 1853, she demanded the use of the new anesthetic, chloroform.
And this was incredibly controversial at the time.
Very.
Why the controversy? It sounds like an obvious medical benefit.
There was major religious opposition, which argued that relieving the pain of childbirth went against the biblical decree that women must labor in sorrow.
And medical caution as well?
Yes, about the potential unknown long-term effects. But Victoria was so relieved by the pain reduction that she demanded it again 4 years later for the birth of Beatrice.
Effectively legitimizing the use of obstetric anesthesia for women across Britain and Europe.
Her personal decision had a massive global health impact.
That is a remarkable transition, moving from a deeply personal medical choice to one of the biggest national tragedies of her reign, the Great Famine in Ireland.
Between 1845 and 1849, 1 million died, 1 million emigrated. It was an unparalleled disaster, and it permanently scarred Anglo-Irish relations.
And Victoria remains controversial, often labeled the Famine Queen, leading to persistent myths about her indifference.
Right. We need to address one of those myths directly. The idea that she only donated £5.
Oh, that's just completely untrue.
That myth is thoroughly debunked by the sources. She personally donated £2,000 to the British Relief Association in January 1847.
Which was a staggering sum, equivalent to hundreds of thousands of modern pounds.
And significantly more than any other individual private donor. So while the Crown was politically and structurally incapable of preventing the disaster,
Her personal philanthropy was genuine.
it was. Furthermore, she supported the Maynooth Grant, providing funds to a Roman Catholic seminary in Ireland, which was a politically fraught decision given the significant anti-Catholic sentiment among the British Protestant establishment at the time.
So her actions in Ireland showed genuine concern, even if the government response was inadequate.
I think so.
Shifting to international relations, she was highly proactive, especially in trying to cultivate peace with France.
Yes, she was a keen diplomat. Her visits to King Louis-Philippe I in 1843 and 1845 were landmark moments.
Making her the first reigning British monarch to visit a French monarch since the Field of the Cloth of Gold in 1520.
She valued these personal connections, but her strong interest in foreign policy often put her in direct conflict with her own ministers.
Most notably the aggressive and willful Foreign Secretary, Lord Palmerston.
Victoria despised Palmerston's unilateral style. She complained that he acted entirely without consulting her or the cabinet.
This was a direct challenge to what Walter Bagehot would later codify as the monarch's constitutional rights.
The right to be consulted, the right to encourage, and the right to warn.
So she saw him as infringing upon the very limited constitutional power she still held.
Precisely. She viewed it as a constitutional breach. She complained incessantly to the Prime Minister, Lord Russell, demanding Palmerston's removal.
And the clash finally culminated in 1851.
It did, when Palmerston recognized Louis Napoleon Bonaparte's coup in France without consulting anyone. Victoria successfully orchestrated his removal.
She used her power to warn and consult to great effect there. But politics is cyclical, especially when war comes knocking.
Indeed. The poor management of the Crimean War led to the collapse of the government in early 1855.
And despite Victoria's profound personal distrust and animosity toward Palmerston,
She had no choice but to appoint him as prime minister, as neither of the other contenders could command sufficient parliamentary support.
this was a critical lesson. Even the Queen's strongest preferences must yield to political necessity and the will of the Commons.
Absolutely. And despite her struggles with him, she continued her diplomatic efforts with France, returning a visit to Napoleon III in 1855, attending a massive ball at Versailles. It shows her ability to separate personal political feeling from the needs of the state.
We now arrive at 1861, which stands as the single most psychologically devastating year of Victoria's life.
A calamity that utterly reset her identity and the character of the British monarchy for generations.
Two profound personal losses occurred in quick succession. First, the death of her mother in March.
And this death was deeply complicated. Victoria had spent most of her life estranged from her mother due to the machinations of the Kensington System.
Right.
But upon her mother's death, Victoria read her private papers and was stunned to realize the depth of her mother's love for her, which she felt had been entirely obscured.
That must have been a crushing realization.
It caused tremendous heartbreak and profound guilt. She immediately redirected her blame, holding Conroy and Layton responsible for what she saw as their wicked estrangement during those critical formative years.
She carried that emotional burden heavily.
And then came the devastating loss in December. Prince Albert died.
Albert had been unwell, suffering from chronic stomach issues, but his death was diagnosed as typhoid fever.
Yes, but Victoria, in her grief, she personalized the loss. She rejected the medical diagnosis and clung instead to the belief that Albert was killed by that dreadful business.
The worry and stress caused by their son Albert Edward's Bertie's philanderings.
Albert had traveled to Cambridge to confront Bertie shortly before falling ill, and Victoria blamed the stress of that confrontation for his death.
The intensity of her grief was immediately visible to the public.
Utter devastation. She plunged into a state of deep, perpetual mourning, wearing black for the remaining 40 years of her life.
And crucially, she avoided public appearances almost entirely, retreating to her private residences at Windsor, Osborne, and Balmoral.
This self-imposed isolation is how she earned the famous nickname Widow of Windsor. But this wasn't just a personal retreat. It had enormous constitutional and political consequences.
It did. The Queen's absence severely diminished the popularity of the monarchy and created a vacuum that fueled a powerful Republican movement throughout the 1860s and 1870s.
Right. For the middle and working classes who were experiencing massive cultural shifts, a monarch who refused to perform her public duties seemed irrelevant.
The political commentary at the time was scathing, reflecting that sentiment.
Scathing and public. In March 1864, an anonymous person actually posted a notice on the railings of Buckingham Palace.
Anna read, "These commanding premises to be let or sold in consequence of the late occupant's declining business."
That kind of direct public hostility shows how vulnerable the monarchy had become due to her seclusion.
So how did the monarchy pull back from that abyss? What brought the Widow of Windsor back into public favor?
It was a very gradual process, urged on by her family, including her uncle Leopold. She made token appearances, like a drive through London or attending Parliament in 1866.
But the real turning point was another medical crisis.
Her son, the Prince of Wales, contracted typhoid fever, the same disease that supposedly killed Albert.
In late 1871, at the peak of the Republican movement, the public feared a repeat of Albert's death.
Exactly. And the genuine public anxiety showed that people still cared about the royal family as individuals. When Bertie recovered in early 1872, the response was generalized rejoicing.
That relief was channeled into massive expressions of public loyalty.
It was essential for the crown's survival. The recovery was celebrated with a huge public parade and a grand service of Thanksgiving in St. Paul's Cathedral in February 1872.
Effectively silencing the Republican movement for years.
And almost bizarrely, a harmless assassination attempt 2 days later further solidified that public goodwill.
Right. Arthur O'Connor, a 17-year-old, aimed an unloaded pistol at her carriage.
And the public reaction was overwhelming loyalty and sympathy for the Queen. The monarchy's popularity was reestablished, ironically, not through the Queen performing her duties, but through shared anxiety and relief over her son and sympathy following yet another attack.
As she navigated this return to public life, she was cultivating highly controversial personal relationships in her private life, relationships that defied court sensibilities.
Let's talk about John Brown.
John Brown was a Scottish manservant who became Victoria's indispensable personal attendant throughout the 1860s and beyond.
He developed an unparalleled closeness to the Queen, leading to those widespread, persistent rumors of a romantic attachment or even a secret, non-formal marriage.
Rumors that led to her being called Mrs. Brown in court circles.
Correct. The court was scandalized by his easy familiarity, his occasional impudence, and the immense trust Victoria placed in him.
And she publicly affirmed his importance in her published work, Leaves from the Journal of Our Life in the Highlands.
Yes, she did.
These deep, intense emotional bonds, first with Albert, then with Brown, were clearly personal necessities for the Queen. But were they politically savvy?
No, not at all. They weren't politically savvy. They were an emotional reaction to profound loss. Victoria's intense need for connection, dating back to the emotional vacuum of her childhood, overruled political prudence.
She needed a link to the past, and Brown was a touchstone of her life with Albert at Balmoral.
Exactly. And after Brown's death in 1883, the true extent of her devotion was revealed when she intended to publish a highly eulogistic biography about him.
And her advisors stepped in to prevent that.
They panicked. Her private secretary, Sir Henry Ponsonby, and the Dean of Windsor convinced her to destroy the manuscript, fearing it would reignite the Mrs. Brown rumors.
And severely damage the recovered image of the monarchy.
Right. She eventually compromised by publishing a sequel, More Leaves, dedicated to her devoted personal attendant and faithful friend, John Brown, but the full, unfiltered tribute to Brown was censored by her own court.
While navigating these emotional and public crises, she was simultaneously making a massive geopolitical maneuver, becoming the Empress of India.
This happened after the Indian Rebellion of 1857. The rebellion led to the British government dissolving the East India Company and formally incorporating its Indian territories and protectorates directly into the British Empire.
Which necessitated a new symbolic title for the sovereign.
It did. And Victoria's role in the proclamation that followed was actually very balanced for the time, wasn't it?
It was. She condemned atrocities on both sides of the conflict. Urged by Albert's previous sensibilities, she insisted that the official proclamation announcing the transfer of power should breathe feelings of generosity, benevolence, and religious toleration.
She personally ensured that language threatening the undermining of native religions and customs was removed, guaranteeing religious freedom instead.
And this political act of consolidation was championed by her favorite prime minister, Benjamin Disraeli.
Disraeli, whom she adored, pushed through the Royal Titles Act of 1876, granting her the title Empress of India from May 1st, 1876.
This title, formally proclaimed at the Delhi Durbar, solidified her identity as the ruler of a subcontinent and dramatically cemented her public image as the head of an unparalleled imperial force.
We now move to her later reign. As Queen and Empress, Victoria's long life meant working with a huge roster of political figures.
But none were more important or more illustrative of her political preferences than her two great rivals, Benjamin Disraeli and William Ewart Gladstone.
The contrast in her feelings toward these two men highlights her deeply personal, almost idiosyncratic approach to governance. She absolutely adored Disraeli.
He was a master of charm and flattery.
Oh, yes.
I love that quote about his approach to royalty. He said, "Everyone likes flattery, and when you come to royalty, you should lay it on with a trowel."
He certainly did, and she loved it. He flattered her by referring to them as "we authors, ma'am," referencing her published journals.
This personal connection, this ability to make her feel consulted and appreciated, sealed their bond.
It did. She also strongly endorsed his expansionist foreign policy, believing firmly that Britain had to maintain its global status and consequently must be prepared for attacks and wars continually.
This political alignment was clearly about personality as much as policy, because she hated Gladstone.
She truly detested him. She complained that his demeanor was far less appealing, finding him overly earnest and moralizing.
Her most famous complaint was that he spoke to her as though she were a public meeting rather than a woman.
He treated her as a constitutional office. Disraeli treated her as a person.
And this personal animosity translated into attempts to interfere with his government's composition, even late in her reign.
Yes. When Gladstone returned to power after the 1892 general election, she successfully objected to his proposal to appoint the radical MP Henry Labouchere to the cabinet.
She leveraged her right to be consulted and warned into an effective veto based entirely on her political discomfort with the man.
She openly considered Gladstone's subsequent ministry the worst I have ever had, and never forgave him for what she considered his reckless policy in the Sudan.
specifically blaming him for the death of General Gordon during the siege of Khartoum.
Exactly. The evidence of her preference is literally set in stone.
It is. After Disraeli died in 1881, she erected a memorial tablet dedicated by his grateful sovereign and friend, Victoria R.I.
She made sure the world knew he was her friend, not just a minister.
These later years were defined by enormous, joyous public celebrations, the Jubilees, which effectively signaled the complete success of the monarchy's popular recovery after the years of seclusion.
The Golden Jubilee in 1887, marking 50 years on the throne, was a colossal affair. The banquet hosted 50 kings and princes, demonstrating her re-established international prominence and the stability of the institution.
And it was shortly after this Jubilee that she brought in her second, highly controversial confidant, Abdul Karim, who became known as the Mushi.
Karim was one of 2 Indian Muslims hired as waiters, but Victoria rapidly promoted him, making him her munshi, or teacher, instructing her in Urdu.
This relationship replicated the emotional necessity she found in John Brown, and it triggered an equally tremendous uproar among her family and her retainers.
They weren't just jealous, they were suspicious. They accused him of lying about his parentage and background, spying for a political organization, and notably, they exhibited blatant racial bias against him.
Complaining he favored Hindus over Muslims.
Right. Her own equerry, Frederick Ponsonby, reported that the Munshi occupies very much the same position as John Brown used to do.
So she had these intense, emotionally necessary but politically unwise relationships with men who fell outside the rigid court structure.
And she dismissed her court's outcry as simple prejudice. She supported him fiercely, despite the internal chaos and the family's attempts to have him expelled. She even wrote that the complaints were rooted in racial prejudice.
Karim remained in her service, teaching her Urdu, until her death.
He did.
10 years later came the ultimate spectacle of imperial power, the Diamond Jubilee in 1897. This was deliberately framed as a festival of the British Empire at the suggestion of Colonial Secretary Joseph Chamberlain.
The scale was unprecedented. It was a massive demonstration of global might. Prime ministers of all self-governing dominions were invited to London.
And, critically, foreign heads of state were excluded.
Yes, and that was deliberate diplomacy, driven by Victoria's personal feelings.
She wanted to avoid inviting her eldest grandchild, Wilhelm II, a German emperor,
who she considered autocratic and who, she believed, lacked what she called little heart, or Zartgefühl.
Zartgefühl. What exactly does that German word imply here?
It translates roughly as tact, delicacy, or sensitivity. She felt Wilhelm II was boorish, arrogant, and lacked the subtlety necessary for statecraft.
So by excluding foreign heads of state, she avoided a public diplomatic incident with a relative she found deeply distasteful.
It shows that her personal opinions still significantly influence state protocol.
The Jubilee procession was 6 miles long, a true spectacle, yet the Queen herself, due to failing health, couldn't even participate fully.
No, she was 78 and suffering terribly. She'd been plagued by lameness and rheumatism since falling downstairs in 1883, and her weight had increased significantly due to comfort eating.
She was unable to climb the steps of St. Paul's Cathedral for the service.
So the service had to be held outdoors, and she remained seated in her open carriage. It was a poignant image of the immovable, elderly empress presiding over an endlessly changing world.
The final years of her life were marked by increasing frailty.
Her health declined rapidly. In addition to rheumatism and weight issues, her eyesight was failing due to cataracts. She spent her final Christmas of 1900 at Osborne House feeling weak, drowsy, and confused.
She died on January 22, 1901, at the age of 81 at Osborne House.
Her son, Edward VII, and her difficult grandson, Wilhelm II, were at her bedside.
Her final instructions for her funeral were highly symbolic of her life.
They were. She insisted on a military funeral, befitting a soldier's daughter and the head of the army.
And she was to be dressed in white, completely abandoning the black she had worn for 40 years of mourning.
But the small, secret details of her burial truly reveal the emotional core of her life.
They reveal everything the court tried to repress.
Exactly. Hidden beneath a carefully positioned bunch of flowers in her left hand and concealed from the family's view were an array of mementos that bridged her 2 great emotional pillars.
One of Albert's dressing gowns, a plaster cast of his hand,
and a lock of John Brown's hair, Brown's picture, and John Brown's mother's wedding ring, which Brown had given Victoria in 1883. She ensured her 2 closest companions went with her.
She was the last monarch of the House of Hanover.
That's right.
Victoria's reign was so long and transformative that her legacy is essentially the blueprint for the modern monarchy. Let's start with the lighter side, the persistent myth of "we are not amused."
It's a complete fabrication. She actively denied ever saying it, and her staff's journals frequently recorded that she was immensely amused and roared with laughter often.
The image of the constantly grim, puritanical monarch is largely inaccurate, fueled by her long period of seclusion.
Right. More substantially, her most enduring legacy is biological and cultural. She is literally the grandmother of Europe, and she firmly established the concept of the family monarchy.
And this concept was vital for the survival of the crown. You have to remember, her predecessors, George IV and William IV, were associated with serious scandal, excessive debt, and dissolute living.
Victoria's family monarchy emphasized morality, piety, and stable family values.
And why was that emphasis on morality so important to the audience?
Because it appealed directly to the burgeoning middle classes. These were the pious, industrial, non-aristocratic people who now formed the backbone of Britain's prosperity.
By presenting the crown as the ultimate moral familial institution, an image carefully crafted by Albert Victoria made the monarchy respectable.
Relatable and therefore politically necessary to this new influential social group.
Politically, her long reign saw the finalization of the shift to a modern constitutional monarchy, where the monarch is symbolic rather than dominant.
That process was ongoing, but Victoria's era finalized it. While she certainly used her political influence, as seen in the removal of Palmerston and her objections to Gladstone's cabinet, the absolute power had definitively transferred to the House of Commons.
And this shift is perfectly encapsulated by Walter Bagehot's 1867 analysis of the monarch's residual powers.
He famously defined the monarch's remaining rights as the right to be consulted, the right to encourage, and the right to warn. We've seen her use those rights frequently, but the fact that they had to be defined so specifically shows just how far the political pendulum had swung away from the crown's direct authority.
Victoria's long life helped smooth this transition, ensuring the monarchy remained a respected, though politically limited, symbol.
It did.
Finally, we must address the royal disease, haemophilia B, which traces back to her.
Her youngest son, Prince Leopold, was affected by the blood clotting disorder, and 2 of her daughters were carriers. Through their marriages, Victoria became the source of haemophilia B that spread through several royal lines across Europe,
Including the Spanish, German, and Russian royal families, famously afflicting Tsarevich Alexei.
This biological mystery often leads to speculation that she was not the daughter of the Duke of Kent, as the disease was not seen in her direct ancestors.
But the historical records offer no support for that theory.
No, and modern medical analysis suggests a much simpler and more likely explanation: spontaneous mutation. Hemophilia arises more frequently in children of older fathers.
And the Duke of Kent was over 50 at the time of Victoria's conception.
This condition accounts for about a third of all spontaneous cases, making her the spontaneous originator of the disease in the royal line.
And one last piece of legacy, perhaps the most critical for historians, her voluminous personal writing.
She kept detailed journals for nearly 70 years, filling 122 volumes, averaging 2,500 words per day. It is an unparalleled primary source.
But it comes with a major, unfortunate caveat.
After her death, her youngest daughter, Princess Beatrice, was appointed her literary executor. Beatrice dutifully transcribed and edited the diaries, particularly those covering political matters.
And in the process, she burned the originals.
She became the great royal censor. Beatrice filtered the historical record, ensuring that much of the raw, unfiltered political maneuvering and personal opinion of the Queen remains partially obscured.
It is the great irony. The Queen, who documented her life so extensively, left the final, crucial editorial decision to the one person who prioritized protecting the royal image over historical transparency.
It really is.
We have successfully synthesized the incredible life of Queen Victoria, who started isolated and manipulated under the Kensington System, yet fought back to become a sovereign who knew the power of her own will.
She found ecstatic love only to lose it, was transformed by grief into the secluded widow of Windsor, and finally emerged as the symbol of an unparalleled global empire,
Successfully ushering the British monarchy into its modern constitutional role. Her entire life was a balancing act between intense personal emotion and absolute public duty.
It really was.
We've seen how Victoria's personal choices, from her initial resistance to her mother and Conroy, to her deep controversial bonds with men like John Brown and her years of seclusion, directly shaped the constitutional and cultural power of the monarchy for the next century. Consider this provocative thought. If the death of her father, the Duke of Kent, had occurred just one single month earlier, she would have inherited the throne as a minor, necessitating the hated regency of her mother and Sir John Conroy.
Right.
How fundamentally different might the Victorian era and the entire trajectory of the modern British monarchy have been had Queen Victoria not spent her first night as queen alone, free from the oversight of the Kensington system?
Something to ponder.
Something to ponder as you reflect on this deep dive.